Second World War was the most widespread global conflict in history. It is generally considered to have lasted 6 years and 1 day. World War II involved the vast majority of the world's nations, including all of the great powers, eventually forming two opposing military alliances, the Alliances and the Axis. Directly involved more than 100 million people from more than 30 different countries in a state of total war. The major participants, through their economic, industrial, and scientific capabilities behind the war effort, erasing the distinction between civilians and military resources and rights. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The atomic bombings of the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, ruled then by Hirohito or Emperor Showa, were conducted by the United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt during the final stages of World War II in August 1945. Following a firebombing campaign that destroyed many Japanese cities, the Allies prepared for a costly invasion of Japan. The war in Europe ended when Nazi Germany signed its instruments of surrender on May 8, 1945, but the Pacific War continued. Together with the United Kingdom and China, the United States called for the unconditional surrender of the Japanese armed forces. Then, USA soldiers like Mr. Carl Ross, who was enlisted in the Army Corps of Engineers and rose to captain serving in the Pacific Theater, participated in the Operation Downfall. This strategic activity was the overall Allied plan for the invasion of Japan.
Hello, I'm Rafael, and today I'm going to interview Mr. Carl Ross. Hello, Mr. Carl. How are you?
Thank you, fine. What can I do for you?
I want to ask you some questions.
Please do.
When were you born and where?
I was born in 1920 in New York City.
Can you tell us about your childhood?
Yes, with pleasure. I went to many schools as a student. I was a good student, and I ended up by getting a scholarship to go to a university in Connecticut, Wesleyan University. And I spent 4 years. During that time, the United States was attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, and we ended the war, and I was called into service, but I finished my studies first before going into the war.
Did you participate in any war?
It was called the Philippine Campaign. Philippine Islands were the base for attacking Japan, and we were marshaling troops in the Philippine Islands. 1 million American troops were preparing to invade Japan when, fortunately, we were able to defeat the Japanese with the help of the atomic bomb, which was dropped over Hiroshima, and that forced the Japanese to surrender unconditionally.
Who was in charge of your mission during the war?
General MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur, was in charge. He was a good leading figure, and he brought the army together successfully.
Carl's army assignment then took him to Manila, where the Combat Engineers Unit trained the troops for the massive invasion of Japan. Their specific task was to land on the beaches of Kyushu, the southern island of Japan. To clear away the underwater defenses the Japanese had built there to prevent an invasion force from landing. In August 5, 1945, Coward was ready for the invasion of Japan, but his troops were ordered to leave the island because the United States unleashed its surprise secret weapon, the atomic bomb. August 6, 1945, a uranium gun-type atomic bomb, Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, a plutonium impulsive type bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. August 15, 1945, few days later after the bombing of Nagasaki, Japan announced its surrender to the Allies. September 2, 1945, the instrument of surrender is signed, ending of World War II. The bombing's role in Japan's surrender and their ethical justification are still debated. Damage. Within the first 2 to 4 months of the bombings, the number of casualties were thousands of people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Roughly half of them occurred on the first day. During the following months, large numbers of people died because of the effect of burns, radiation sickness, and other injuries compounded by illness. In both cities, most of the dead were civilians. 1945 to 1952. After the defeat of Japan in World War II, the United States led the alliances in the occupation and political, social, and economical rehabilitation of the Japanese state. In September 1945, U.S. General Douglas MacArthur took charge of the Supreme Command of the Allied Powers, SCAP, and began the work of rebuilding Japan. Also, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the Republic of China had an advisory role as a part of an Allied Council.
Which were your responsibilities?
During the war, I was in the combat engineer battalion. Our mission was to land on the shores of Japan, prepare the way for the Marines to land with their landing crafts. But fortunately, the war did not make it necessary for us to invade Japan.
The initial effort to punish and reform Japan. The work to revive the Japanese economy. And the conclusion of a formal peace treaty and alliance. On those days, Mr. Ross went to Japan first as a Capitan Officer and later as a civilian. He worked on the staff of General MacArthur, who ruled that country for 5 years. Mr. Ross joined MacArthur as Tokyo commander in the Industrial Division.
How and when did you finish your participation in World War II?
I finished it in 1945. When the war was over, I was in Tokyo in charge of a unit helping the Japanese to recuperate. We were there to give them assistance to restore their normal civilization. My mission at first was to see that the military potential of the Japanese would be reduced. So we inspected the factories. We disarmed all the military equipment makers and forced them to convert to civilian production.
The Japan Confederation of A and H Bomb Sufferers Organization is a group formed by Ibakusha in 1956 with the goals of pressuring the Japanese government to improve support of the victims, and lobbying governments for the abolition of nuclear weapons. The memorial in Hiroshima and Nagasaki contain lists of the names of the bakusha who are known to have died since the bombings, updated annually on the anniversaries of the bombings. The annual anniversary takes place in the momentum marking the hypocenter or ground zero of the atomic bomb explosion over Nagasaki.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlos. Thank you, Carl.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle.